Welcome to Real Women's Stories. In this episode, I'm going to be asking career and family. Can we actually have it all?
When I had my first child, I birthed the child and guilt straight away, because it put me in a position where it didn't seem to matter where I was, I felt guilty for being there.
I have always been a working mum. I've always worked ever since the kids were younger and in nursery. And I think it's really important to explore the pressures of society and what happens in our workplace and how that affects our mental health and the whole experience of having to navigate family life while also having to work.
What I didn't realise at the time was that I was living on very high anxiety, because the thought of missing the train now had a whole other level.
This is Real Women's Stories. Today's topic explores career and family. Can we as parents have it all? Because let's face it, the pressures on life and society and financial pressures, a lot of us have to work. But how do we get through that journey without all the anxieties and all the additional pressures that we have from having a baby and then having to go to work? How do we navigate all of that? Today's guest is a wonderful, wonderful woman. Her name is Rebecca Shannon, and she runs a coaching practice. I have been not just fortunate, but I mean, just the luckiest person ever to have met Rebecca. She has empowered me in my own coaching journey. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't even be doing this podcast. So a huge thanks goes to Rebecca. But I really wanted to ask Rebecca how she coped with being a parent. She's got 3 boys. And how on earth does she navigate her life through having a very, very high profile job in the city to then becoming a coach? How does she navigate her journey as being a mum and dealing with her career and being a successful woman that she is? So let's find out how Rebecca managed to have a career and family.
Before I had my boys, I was very much, I'm not going to have children. I was always going to be cool Auntie Bex and carry on living my life, as I was. I was a very ambitious career woman at that time. When I did make the decision, got married, had children, got married and decided to have children, I was probably a little naive in many ways going into the marriage, going into having children. Nobody takes us aside really and talks about what that is actually going to mean in your career, practically. And if they do, the best you get is they talk about it like when they're babies, having a baby. What are you going to do when you have a baby? What they forget to tell you is that baby will turn into a toddler, into going to school, into a teenager and beyond, right? So I think I went into it quite naively. I made it clear that I would be going back to work. That was something that I wanted to do. I'd never sort of decided once I had children I wouldn't work. So that was something that was agreed. I also was very lucky in the corporate career, in the corporate company I worked for. I had a very supportive boss who, because I'd worked there for a long time, really supported me in my maternity leave. So I had full pay for a year, which was unheard of, which meant that, practically I could take a year off and I didn't see any change in my financial situation for a year. I did see a change in my financial situation when I went back to work and had to pay for childcare 3-4 days a week, right? It was very expensive, which again, people don't necessarily really understand the implications of that. So I kind of thought life would just carry on as normal, really. And that I would have another year off with my baby, and then I would go back to work, and it would be easy to a certain degree if I think back now.
Sure. I just want to touch upon a few points. The feeling of actually going back into the office, having had your child once you've gone on maternity leave, is the person covering me going to steal my job? Like, how's that going to influence? Have they done a better job than me because I've been at home with my baby and I'm going to walk into the office and maybe they've done a really good job and now everyone's looking at me because I'm tired, I'm coming to work, I've got my kids, and maybe my baby brain's still with me, because it does take a while for that to for us to start using our brains again once we've had kids. How do you think that, if there were people listening, how do you think that they would navigate those challenges?
Sharing from my experience as much as my coaching, right, is that I had no idea what was coming down the track. When I had my first child, I birthed the child and guilt straight away, because it put me in a position where it didn't seem to matter where I was. I felt guilty for being there. So if I was at home with my baby, I felt guilty for not being at work. And if I was at work, I felt guilty about not being at home with my baby. So after when I went back, and so that is another part of the mental health jigsaw that we don't necessarily prepare for, because we don't understand it until we're there. Now, that might not be the same for every woman, but a lot of the women that I've worked with, either in careers and then gone and had children and come back, I don't know anyone who hasn't experienced that to a certain degree. And then, as you say, on top of that is, am I going to be the same person? Am I going to have the mental capacity? All the worries, like you say, of what's going on when I'm not at work, with my team, with my job, with the business. I mean, the company I worked in, if you went away on holiday for 2 weeks, the whole world could shift while you're away. So to think I'm going to be away for a year was quite terrifying. And again, I was lucky in my experience. I had a great boss who was also a great friend. I had an incredible team that I empowered to do exactly what you said, which was do a better job when I wasn't there than when I was. I was in that position where I'd already learned how to be a great leader, which meant I didn't really have those concerns for me about, what's happening when I'm not there, because actually I'd set it up to be exactly that, knowing that I could then go back in and add value. But I think, as you say, for a lot of women, they feel guilt, they'll feel anxiety. They're going to have a load of biological and physiological changes going on in their body, which then affect their mental health that they have no way of planning for. There is literally no way of planning for it. One of my examples was, and I probably did have postnatal depression, which I wouldn't have said to anyone at the time. And when they come and do the little quiz, I was doing everything to make sure I answered it so that nobody thought I had postnatal depression. I had my first child in 2005. Do you know what my greatest fear was, Lisa? That someone would come and take him away from me. Because I wasn't well enough to look after him. In 2006, I had my first child. But that was a real fear for me. Now, logically, if someone had said to me before I had him, you're gonna fear that, I wouldn't have believed him. I was a very intelligent, successful businesswoman. I'd planned my pregnancy, I'd planned my maternity leave, I had a great team, I was a great leader. And yet within that space of having my child and everything that was going on physiologically, biologically, I became this person who was scared that someone was going to come and take my child away from me.
How did you navigate your way back to work after that?
It was bloody really tough. The way I navigated going back to work was I kind of shoved all those emotions and feelings down, put on my, best suit, put a mask on, and went back to work. But I remember the first day that I, took my son to nursery. So I had to get my son to nursery, leave him at nursery, then run to get the train up to London, work a full day, get the train home, go and pick my son up from nursery. I mean, I look back on it now and just think, I don't even know how I did it. I have no idea. But we'd done some trial runs where I just left him and went round the corner for a cup of tea and a cry. The first day I did it, I remember I left him at nursery, and I remember feeling quite good about going back. I felt excited about going back to work, and I got on the train and everything went smoothly. And then I actually had quite a good day at work, because everyone's like, pleased to see you, and you're back at work, and you're like, oh wow, I've got a life outside nappies, all of that. Got the train home again, which what I didn't realize at the time was that I was living on very high anxiety, because the thought of missing the train now had a whole other level.
Oh gosh.
Because my husband was in London too, working. He wouldn't come back for later. I didn't have family near me, didn't have a support network around me. So again, that fear of someone might come and take my baby away got amplified, because it's like, what if I don't get back in time? The nursery go through a protocol with you. Don't get back in time, we'll ring you, we'll ring your emergency, and then we'll ring social services if you're not there to pick your child up. That's the protocol they go through, right? So there was that level of anxiety, but actually I caught the train on time. Everything was fine. I got back to pick up my son from nursery, and I remember walking in and them saying to me, yeah, he's been fine, but you forgot, and God, I can't even remember the name of it now, but he had like a toy that he had with him all the time. And she said, he's been fine, but you forgot to leave that for him. So can you imagine how I felt in that moment? Because suddenly all of that day that I just had where I felt I was doing great, it had gone well, I got the train, and I remember just sitting in the car, putting him in his little car seat in the back of the car and sitting in the car and sobbing because I felt everything that I'd felt about, failing as a mum, failing just came rushing through. When I look back now, I was in high survival mode. And this is what worries me for other women, because I think a lot of us are very good at masking. We're very good at surviving. So for me, what I realize now is that then every day was approached at that level of anxiety. I didn't really recognize it at the time, but that's what was going on. And I can remember, days, and I wouldn't say it was every day. I worked 3 days a week, I think, at that time. But the days I went to London, I'd cry on the train. I'd leave my boy and I'd cry on the train. And, I look back at that, and it comes from guilt. It comes from fear. It comes from thinking, I'd love to stay at home with my baby, but then we don't have enough money coming in. I don't want to lose my skills as everything I've worked for. I don't want to just give it up. It just became this very stressful, existence. And again, I think a lot of the time, as women, I can speak for myself as women, we kind of just learn to live with that.
I think we're always in survival mode. And I'm listening to everything you're saying, and it just hits every single nerve in my body. And actually, you're right. I never really looked back and thought about all of the anxiety and all of the stress and the palpitations and the driving. I just hear everything that you've said with, is my bag packed? Have I got everything in the bag? You hand it over to the nursery staff, you go away, you try to focus on your job, but half of your brain is thinking, is my baby okay? What day is she having? And then you feel the pressure of, well, I'm not concentrating because I've got this important meeting, and you've got to switch off. And then you feel guilty for switching off because you think, I've left my baby in nursery and I'm doing this job. I know I've got to concentrate. And at that point, I had to work. There was no two ways. I was a single mum and I had to work. And I just think that I didn't really, I think until this conversation, actually, I didn't really think about all those feelings because we just mask it. We just get on, we just do it. And the stress levels that I now know that I was under were just immense. You think that men feel like that?
No, I don't think they do, is the honest truth, right? And partly that is, it's not a criticism. It's just that, and I do a lot of work around feminine and masculine energy, right? So not necessarily male and female, but masculine energy. And unfortunately, what happens with a lot of us women is we end up quite high in our masculine energy because we have to keep going. But naturally, masculine energy is more about providing for. It's providing for their children. It's providing for their for their partner, woman, however they want to describe it. And so it doesn't really, physiologically, there is a difference in how we resonate with these sorts of challenges. So, and we still work in a very traditional, or we still live rather in a very traditional patriarchal system, right? And this isn't me, hating men or being a, really radical feminist. It's the truth. We live and work in a very patriarchal society. It is geared up for man goes to work, woman stays at home. Even for all the things we've had about equal rights, it's still built into the very fabric of our society. And you can see this because there are men that are the ones that stay at home or the ones who are the primary caregiver, but they're the exception. They're the disruptors. People talk about, oh my God, it's amazing. This guy's not working. He's staying at home with the kids. Now, if that was more normal, it wouldn't be such a conversation point, but it's the fact that that's going on. So no, I don't think, and from my own experience again, I was working and doing the childcare and doing everything else, doing the drop-offs and the pickups. So I was the one that was constantly worrying about, is the bag ready? Are they there? Am I going to miss my train home? And also when I went back to work in a very patriarchal society, company, because although I had a very supportive boss and they did support me working part-time and they did support me working from home, you got the comments, oh, leaving early tonight, are you?
God, yeah.
Oh, it's all right for you leaving at 3:30. You still got all those comments, even though I was being paid less because I was working less hours, even though I'd made those agreements with my boss, even though that was the contracted hours that I was working and the agreements we had in place, it doesn't stop the comments from other people. Mm. Right. Which again then adds to the load, because we then feel like, we feel guilty for leaving.
Sure.
But you know what? My day started at whatever time of the morning to get myself up, get myself dressed, get the kids to the nursery, or later on in life to the childminder. Then get on a train, then try and do a whole day's work, because that's what else happened. I'd try and do a whole day's work in like less hours, to then get all the snidey comments when you're walking out the door, to then sit on a train for another two hours, nearly door to door, to then go and pick up the children from nursery, and then pretty much do all the evening stuff with the kids. I think what we have to remember in a patriarchal society, especially where we're then trying to have, women are trying to have it all, right? We want to work and we want to have children. The men are as affected by this, but in different ways. I don't think it's any easier for men, and I think it's getting harder, because then especially as women do step up into their full power and potential, which is fantastic, unless the culture and the structures around us start shifting a little bit more, we're in competition. And that's what happened with my husband and I. It's competition all the time. Who's more tired? Who's doing more? Who's working more? Who's looking after the kids more? Because we're trying to balance it out in a system that isn't balanced.
I just wanted to ask you, in order for society to really, and I guess it's not even society, but things to really change in the working world, do you not think we should be educating the top CEOs of these companies? So, because the thing is, you can have an HR department, but if the CEOs aren't buying into it, how do you think we can educate?
I think you're right. It does need to come. It needs to come from the top people who are running companies. In many ways, industrialization took us into this situation where, if you go back millennia, both men and women were supported by other men and women. We were much more in community. So, the old saying of, it takes a village to raise a child. We don't have those villages anymore, right? Industrialization basically kind of led us into a very masculine, productive way of working, right? So that's where, because machines work like that, we sort of decided, that works really efficiently for a sausage making machine. That's how we'll run a company full of people. And we kind of expected people to work in the way that a machine does, right? This could be a whole other topic, by the way. It's one of my favorites, right? What we also did at that stage was we took people out of communities and we started putting them in boxes. Man, woman, children. Man, woman, children. Man, women, children. We've never lived like that. Over millennia, we've always lived in community. So when the woman, and don't forget that women have always worked, right? It's not a new thing. It's that we changed where we wanted to work, but women have always worked. But what they did was they had the work of, guys go back to cave time now, right? Guys go out and kill the mammoth, right? They do that like one day. They go off and do that. They bring the mammoth back. It's the women that then go and do all the work with the mammoths, get the hide, meat, everything, right? It's the women that would do that, but they do it in community. So the ones who had young children, either if they were the ones who had the skill set to do a particular part of it, then other women would look after the children while they did the work, or vice versa. So yes, we've got, we need to educate the CEOs at a sort of a company level of like, I know you've got these things in place that seem to do tick box exercise to support this. Let's really look at how these women and men, because it's not just about women, it's about men too. Because as an example, my husband worked in the construction industry. They had no concept of him needing to be at home. They just didn't have that understanding. So we got to shift the understanding there to get beyond the tick box exercise. Oh yeah, but we've got equal rights. Oh yeah, we've got this, right? And one of the first ways that we can do that is to get really accurate about where we are. If you look at most of the people who are doing great work in, diversity and inclusion, equal rights, women's, work, women's people pushing for women to have better rights and more equality and equal pay. You know what the first thing is? We get everyone telling us it's not true. We get everyone trying to prove to us that it's not true, right? The first thing we need is just get really accurate of where we are, which is generally women are paid less. They have, less entry, more barriers to entry, and they're still finding it harder to get in. We are so keen to defend that that's not how it is. That's where all our energy goes.
Right.
Because unfortunately, a lot of people kind of are making some inroads. They're then told they're not doing enough, and they go, well, what's the point then? It's a bit like in a relationship when we're trying to show up for someone and the other person isn't interested. We just go, what's the point? I'll just go back to being feisty, horrible, a dickhead, whatever it is, because what's the point? When I try and do something different, it doesn't get met with anything. So I just give up. So I agree. It has to be at CEO level, and it also has to be at every kind of socio-economic, cultural, societal part of our world.
Yeah. I just think it's going to take a long time for the changes to happen. If I think about any changes that have happened, they've obviously upped the contribution towards childcare. So then it makes it easier for us to obviously put our kids into childcare. But I think that's the only significant change I've seen. There's not a format for every company. Some companies will give you 6 months full pay. Some companies will just give you statutory, your maternity pay. And I think, men get time off now. But it doesn't feel like there are any real changes. No one is looking at the bigger picture and saying, we need to have a format for everyone to follow. So then it becomes fair for everybody rather than,
Yeah. Yes, there's still quite a lot of choice in there for people as to how much or not that they want to choose. And yes, again, let's celebrate the steps we have made, so that we then encourage more of them. If you haven't had that conversation with your partner to say, look, if we're both going to be working, we really need to put in place how we can share the load of, picking the children up from wherever they are, dropping them off, organizing the bags and things to get them there, doing the admin that goes behind the scenes for school or for childcare or for whatever it is, summer clubs, whatever it is. Those are the things that also need to be discussed, and I don't think are always in place.
It's the communication, I think, is what I'm hearing. It's we need to, first of all, understand what we want, who we are, where we see our world going. And then, does this person I'm with fit into that? Does the job that I'm in fit into that? And then, if not, how am I going to navigate my journey, either staying where I am or do I make changes? And then fact finding about what the opportunities are through when you have a child from baby to toddler, even up to teen schools, understanding the whole concept of having a child and going back to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's the thing that I've learned, I didn't know back then, but I know now, is we can create whatever we want. We always have choice. Always. Does that mean it's going to be easy? Does it mean we just go, I want this, and we just click our fingers, it's there? No. But if we decide and we understand we can create anything, then we start showing up in the world like that. And like you said, if you've had those discussions early on, you might look at where you're working and go, okay, I love this job now and it works for me now. But with the information that I've found out, this is not really it's not going to be the place I want to be when I'm a young mum, right? So I now need to, okay, I've got choices now. So now I know that I can go out and intentionally find what it is that's going to work for me, which might be then, well, I can work for myself, because then I get to create exactly what I want. But you might want to do that before you get pregnant.
Yeah.
So like I said, I started my business the day I found out I was pregnant with my son. So, I was still sleepwalking a bit then because I hadn't thought about that, right? The two things were kind of going on, in tandem. And I hadn't consciously created, what's that going to look like if I'm pregnant and having a baby when I'm running my own business?
You've talked a lot about your experiences and challenges working in a corporate organization, having your boys. You've made some changes now. Could you talk to me a little bit about how you've made those changes and the impact on your past experiences, how they have impacted what you're doing now?
We talk about it in coaching world as, it's been a journey, right? And that's the truth, right? And that's why these, telling stories about our journeys is so powerful for people, because they're lived experience. I can share with you so much more through lived experience than I can by telling you things, right? So yeah, my journey, by the time I had my third child, I'd left corporate world. I took voluntary redundancy because I could see that, I was burnt out. I wasn't enjoying the work that I was doing anymore. It was limiting my freedom. And again, I didn't necessarily have that terminology then, but I can see it now. And I wanted to consciously create my life a different way. Now that journey in itself has not all been smooth sailing. It wasn't like I just went, right, I'm going to switch this today and it'll all be good. I went into running my own business. That put financial pressure on me. It put pressure on my relationship with my husband. I then set up my own company, but I wasn't really in the mindset of entrepreneurial mindset. So I ended up basically working as a contractor, but still in the corporate world. I was still working like an employee. I was working far too many hours. I was putting my work before myself, number one, and my family, because I felt all that pressure of financial. My husband in the construction industry, it can be a very volatile industry, and it went, 2008, lost his job, so I then stepped in and felt like I had to be the one that was still working and providing. So all of those things kicked in, even in my entrepreneurial journey in the early days. And unfortunately, as a lot of these things, a lot of things happen, is it, when the shit hits the fan is when we make changes. And at that point, I found coaching. I experienced some coaching for myself. I was like, okay, I need a focus in my life. I want my life to be different. I want to be there for my children, for my family. I want a better life for me. I'd been so miserable for so long in many ways. And so I embarked on learning to become a coach. And then, over the last 6 years, I have created a life that works for me. And I've got it very wrong at times, and I've got it very right at times. It's been a very experimental journey. But what I always had underlying that was, how do I create freedom for myself? Financial freedom, freedom internally, my inner freedom. And I found something that I really love. And then I've consciously created a world that works for me. And as you know, Lisa, we work together, we have conversations together, we spend a lot of time together. It's not, it's not perfect, and it's not without its challenges. However, I am now creating it, right? I'm not a victim to life anymore. And so that to me is the biggest shift, is that internal shift into, I get to create the world that I want to create. And so I choose how I work, I choose how I live, and I come back to, is it the best thing for me? Is it the life that I want to create? And I'm still on that journey, because it's a kind of mountain without a top. I think I've got it completely how I want it to be yet, because I still have 3 children. They now live half with their dad. That's caused complications. And so it's not exactly how I choose it to be, because life still happens to us. However, the freedom and choice that I feel is the big difference. And that begins, to put this back into the conversation we've had, that begins, and if I could give my younger self advice right now, if I could coach my younger self, is really believe that you can create it any way that you want, and that you always have a choice. Because that's the thing that my younger self didn't know, was that I had choices. And that would be my key thing, is I now know I have a choice. And it might not always work. Sometimes it goes wrong. Sometimes it goes really well. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's easy. But we always have choice. And if we really get conscious of who we are, we can create a world that works for us.
Well, I think your story is very empowering. I think that a lot of women who are listening to this, of all ages, it will resonate. There's lots of topics within the topic that we've covered. And I'm just wondering, if people want to get in touch with you, how do they do that? How do they contact you if they want to discuss any of these topics that have been raised, and they might need a little bit of guidance or help?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love anyone who is listening that resonates to come and find me and have a conversation, because as we said, sharing our stories, our experience, is a great way of creating change in our lives. And just one thing to add before I tell people how to find me is, in all of what I've just shared, and I think this is a big thing for women, is there is a really big dollop of forgiveness in there. So if you are resonating with any of this, what I would invite you into is see this as a chance to choose something different. That has to come with a hell of a lot of forgiveness for all the decisions we've made, good, bad, and indifferent, in our past, because that was one of my biggest learns on this journey, and it still is forgiving myself for making decisions with the thinking I had at the time. They were never wrong decisions. They were just decisions and choices. So just wanted to throw that in there, because we can give ourselves a really hard time as women as well. So lots of kindness, compassion, and forgiveness, and knowing that you can create something different moving forward. So how can you do that? Go and find me. I'm on all social media platforms apart from TikTok. Haven't got there yet. So Rebecca Shannon, either find Rebecca Shannon or Compliment Coaching with all ease. So compliment with all ease. Come and get into conversation with me. Coaching is incredibly powerful for helping and guiding you with these changes in your life. Lisa, as you know yourself, it's not that you need a coach. It's that actually, if you choose to work with a coach, it will help you with all of this. You don't need it. I'm not going to talk to your pain point and tell you, if you don't talk to me, your life will never be good again. That's not true. You can do a lot of this work on your own. But whether you choose to speak to me or you speak to any other coach, it's incredibly powerful to have someone holding your hand and walking alongside you as you create this. And if you come and have a conversation with me, our first conversation is completely complimentary. You might get what you need from that one conversation. I'm not going to sell to you.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your story. As I think during the conversation, we know there was going to be a lot of mums that are going to resonate with your experiences. So thank you for being so open and honest. And thank you very much for joining me on this lovely Sunday morning. Rebecca is my life coach, because as coaches, we need to have coaches supporting us through our own journey. And a lot of the conversations with Rebecca, well, most of them are obviously about me and about my journey, about my life. For Rebecca to be so vulnerable with me and open up about her own journey, I really feel that my perception of her as well, that, we're all the same, aren't we, really? People might look at me as a coach when I'm coaching them and think she's just real strong sort of woman that's kind of navigating her life. But actually, we're all humans. We all have the same experiences and we all have the same feelings. What would be really helpful is that if you guys could leave us a review, leave us some comments about what you think about this episode and the topics that we covered. What experiences have you had? If you'd like to email us directly, we have an email address. It's therealstoriespodcast@gmail.com. That's therealstoriespodcast@gmail.com. Get in touch with us. We would love to hear from you. We would like your thoughts. If you want to guest on the podcast, that's the email address to get in touch with us. And you'll see me next midweek for my next episode of Real Women's Stories.